gonna take myself a piece of sunshine and paint it all over my sky, yeah. Be no rain. Be no rain. I'm gonna take the song from every bird and make them sing it just for me, yeah. Birds got something to teach us all about being free, yeah. Be no rain.
Good morning. You just heard I Think I'll Call It Morning by Gil Scott-Heron, the theme song for Randy's Rant, a Boomer and X podcast series. Good morning. June is Black Music Month, and so we will be having a listening party with Mr. Gil Scott-Heron during this month. And so we hope you enjoy the coming podcast for June, as well as the On Juneteenth podcast. But this morning, we are wrapping up a very tumultuous month of May with our podcast on George Floyd, as well as our podcast on Tulsa. And we, during the month of May, were also brought to understand that there had been a lot of feedback on Facebook posts having to do with the issue of an Asian hate bill. And we wanted to come forth and give some thought on that. And one of the things from the get-go, we'll say, don't ever forget that they've been hated on big time. These are some of the things from a vignette from a PBS series called The Asians. Listen to one or two. The Asian Marine recruit is told to step forward and turn around so the rest of the soldiers know what a gook looks like, so they would know what they looked like when they got to Vietnam. Or the wounded Asian American soldier left to lay wounded because the nurses took him for a Viet Cong. Or the Japanese, who were interned in World War II, lost all of their property when Germans went mostly unchecked, while German U-boats were off the East Coast. As Asians like to say, near their race, they wear their race on their face. How many Asians do you know? Let me for a moment be condescending and totally condescendingly facetious. Some of my best friends were Asians. In California, there was Dr. K. Morgan Yamanaka, Willie Chung, Benny Evangelista, who was a Filipino student in journalism school with me. And so that's a moment for us to understand and realize that it was at San Francisco State in the documentary The Asians, you are made aware that the Ethnic Studies Department at San Francisco State, the first in the country, was basically had the support big time of the Asian students of all different Asian ethnicities. And so I often said to people, I used to kind of brag, hey, San Francisco State had the first Black Studies Department in the United States. Sort of as a slight to Berkeley and maybe Columbia and some of the other more liberal schools that had these programs. But the reality of it is San Francisco State University was the first school in the United States to have an ethnic studies department. Then there's so many other people that I really interacted with. Cindy and Mario, Filipino, that we went to school with. They were students with my wife at UC San Francisco. And then there was Naomi, another nursing student from UCSF who lived in the Fruitvale in Oakland. And then after we got to L.A., there was Sun. Sun, I must tell you, the flip-flop of how Asian and Black relations are funny. My son's back in the 90s were very much wanting that first Nintendo PlayStation or whatever. And all over Los Angeles, they could not be found. And so Son, who was Korean, took my wife to Koreatown and pronounced that she wanted to buy this PlayStation. And the Korean merchant, you could sort of tell my wife inferred that they didn't really want to sell it to her because Son had told him what she was looking for and who she was looking for. And so obviously there was a unwillingness on the part of the merchant to really sell this item to this African American lady and her Korean cohort, but it did happen. And so, just again, after talking about the Korean incident with the Korean community, back to K. Morgan Yamanaka, who was my field instructor at San Francisco State. And this man's story is unbelievable. He was a internee at Manzanar at the beginning of World War II, was released, joined the Marine Corps, became a part of a famous fighting group of Japanese American soldiers, and then came back to San Francisco and attended Berkeley and became a social worker and became a street gang worker. Many don't realize that there are in the 70s, some really treacherous San Francisco Asian street gangs. And Mr. Yamanaka was a street gang worker, and then eventually found himself as a professor, tenured professor of social work at San Francisco State. Just an example of an interaction that, as an African American male, he was my seminar instructor, which really is the person that sort of helps you refine, shape, and define your career in any field, not just social work. Then there's Willie Chung, someone who I must pay homage to. Willie was I don't know how we met. We maybe met on a tennis court or something, because that's what we became. We became doubles partners, but not just doubles partners. Willie introduced me and opened up the doors of the Chinese Cantonese community in Oakland, and was so much a giver, an ambassador, that I had many experiences, like eating dim sum, which is a Chinese pastry, in a place called the Asian Gardens in San Francisco, where there are 500 people eating, and they're all eating dim sum of one kind or another. And being a person who always had a mantra that right before we went to get into a doubles match, he would quote the great speech from George Armstrong Patton, that America loves a winner and will not tolerate a loser, because to an American, the mere thought of losing is hateful. And I wouldn't give a hoot and a hell for a man who lost and laughed. And when your sons and daughters asked you what you did during the Great War, WW2, you won't have to say that you shoveled shit in Louisiana. And with that, we would go out and win quite a few games of tennis. It's just a wrap up to know that, I was really being facetious, because I know so many. I mean, this is not even a list of all of the people from the Thai community, such as Supachai and Navaporn and Nung Yao, who were a part of my wife's Asian health project at her clinic. And it doesn't mean they are not prejudiced to African Americans, but not racist. As Richard Pryor said, soon as the immigrant Asians got here, they were first taught the word nigger, and pit them against us from the get-go. Many Koreans became merchants in the black community and became the mom and pops on the block in the 80s and 90s. And Latasha Harlan's incident sealed and cemented the relationship between blacks and Koreans, which meant all Asians, because they all look alike. The Southeast Asians became the stereotyped quickie mark on The Simpsons. And in a further story of one of the people being interviewed in the PBS documentary on the Asians, the guest cites an incident when they were children growing up, and since there were so few Asians on TV, there was a show called Bonanza. And Om Bonanza was a gentleman who was called Hop Singh, who for the most part sort of was the Uncle Tom of Asians, and he was Ben Cartwright's servant. And so the guest on the PBS series said that when they would see that Hop Singh was on the TV, they would yell to whoever else was in the house that we're on TV, which is the same exact thing African Americans did in the late 50s and 60s and all the way through the 70s. We're on TV. Or, so I just implore you to watch this YouTube PBS series, The Asians. As we close out, I would just say to you that Malcolm X said America has the possibility to be the greatest nation on the face of the earth if it underwent certain basic social change. We're nowhere near that greatness. As Marvin said, only love can conquer hate. It may sound passé, but this is truly true. God knows it is. And as we leave, we would give you hope for the Asian community. This morning I learned that there is Mr. Yang, Andrew Yang is polling at numbers of 16% as he attempts to become the next mayor of New York City. We hope that they are able to put themselves on Front Street, and we wish Mr. Yang the best of the luck. And we ask that peace be with all of us. And in this name, this is Randy from Randy and Rant, Randy's Rant. And I would say to you, this is the way it is on Thursday, June the 3rd, 2021. Peace be with you.